now.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Sorry, y'all, for the 4 minutes of banter back and forth that I wasn't hearing because my audio wasn't working. So apparently, in addition to my camera issues, I'm also having audio issues today. I'm Justin Porter, State Director for Special Education. Thank you all so much for being here today. On the call with us, we have a couple of friends from TEA, Jacob Klett. If you want to introduce yourself real quick, Jacob.
Sure, thanks, Justin. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Jacob Klett. I'm Director of Special Education Strategic Integration. I work on Justin's team here at TEA. Monica, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Jacob. I'm Monica Ruiz-Mills. I'm the Director of Effective District Practices and COVID Alignment Supports for the Texas Education Agency. And I've been collaborating with Jacob and Justin.
Monica is relatively new to TEA and has hit the ground running and is probably up to her eyeballs in work right now with everything that's going on related to the session and COVID. So we're going to jump right in. This agenda is in the process of being posted right now to the website. So if that's if you need it or would like it, it'll be there momentarily. Very quickly, a couple of announcements. We have just a reminder that Amplio Dyslexia and the platform for Amplio Dyslexia is free to all Texas LEAs to implement. And also we have an agreement with ESC Region 4 to help us provide the necessary training. So at this point in time, there is actually no cost to LEAs to implement this online dyslexia platform. A reminder that it uses the MTA English curriculum and Esperanza Spanish curriculum, and all of the materials are housed within the platform. Just giving it a little plug. I keep hearing that folks are not aware that it was free. I continue to say that, so I'm going to continue to remind everyone that it's free and and available to any LEAs in the state of Texas. So I'm asking for folks to enlarge. Trust me, there's nothing incredibly interesting in the agenda, but I'll enlarge it. That's as good as I can get, I think. And then the other thing I wanted to share really quickly is we've posted it to the web and it's available for y'all to download, but let me see if I can't find it. A document outlining the recent technical assistance deliverables or assets that have been posted and are available on the various websites. There's links to them in this document, which again is posted on the where you found the link to this webinar. Just want to highlight a couple of things that the Autism Circuit Academy Level 1 cohort is open for registration until the middle of September. That is a highly sought after professional development for educators who work with students with autism. Child Find network at Region 4 has released a couple of different assets, which are listed here. We've also posted a Q&A document around measurable annual goals for children that also has come out of our Child Find network at Region 4. The link to it is right here. And then there are new transition and deployment designee guidelines, which have been posted to the transition network that are listed here. As a reminder, we are working towards an integrated content management system. And so we'll try, as that rolls out over the next 18 months or so, we'll be sure to give you all updates, but that'll be one place, a one-stop shop for all of this good stuff will be folded into one place. I'm seeing a few folks put things into the chat. Really, we will try to answer questions in the Q&A if time allows, but we really don't go through the chat for that. We go through the Q&A feature. So if you have a question, try to drop it in there and we'll either answer it live or we'll take it down to answer later. A lot of times we have to talk to some other folks before we can give a solid answer, but just know that that is the process. Gonna stop share. There we go. Go back to our agenda. Moving on to the discussion items, I wanted to really quickly just say a couple of reminders. There are some documents were posted last week on the TEA website related to remote conferencing. And so we've gotten some questions about that, and I just wanted to quickly address it here. Remote conferencing is an option for for at-home instruction for students for whom the ARD committee has determined it necessary or required for the provision of FAPE. And so there are some documents, like I said, a Q&A that's been posted. We can drop those into the chat. Maybe Jacob, if you can find them real quick, we can drop them into the chat so folks can have them. But just know if you haven't seen them that it's out there. It does require, like I said, the ARD committee will have to have determined that that is necessary for the provision of FAPE. And then after it's available for 20 days without a waiver. If you're going to go into that 21st day of instruction, you do have to submit a request for a waiver for that and provide some documentation. Homebound, the biggest question we've been getting about special education homebound is related to the waiver, and there is a requirement for a waiver there. That's not a change. That's not new. That's been in place for a long time. So I'm sorry, the waiver is, there's not a general waiver required for homebound. There's a waiver required for virtual homebound, remote homebound. So if you have students who are homebound and for one reason or another, the teachers won't be going into the home and you're going to do those services remotely, there is a waiver process for that, as there has been in the past. So that's really just a reminder. Those are my two updates with that. I'm seeing a couple of questions. Jackie, I see a question here about will we be required to designate our intent to utilize Amplio program through the T-Class grant. So you may choose to include that in T-Class, but you don't have to in order to access Amplio. There's not a requirement to go through T-Class to access Amplio. So T-Class is a grant, and there'll be a finite number of LEAs who avail themselves of that and who are awarded that. Outside of that, any LEA in the state of Texas can access Amplio through the regular process. The link that I have here in this agenda will take you to Amplio's website where you can submit your contact information. Someone from Amplio will reach out to you shortly. An anonymous attendee asked where we found the document that I had shared. That document with the resources on it is listed on the TEA recent webinars page in that big long table, which we're working on organizing in a better way. But the top row in that big long table contains links to today's webinar and also to that document. And we're working on getting this agenda posted there as well. So the remote homebound waiver is at 1 per student, or 1 for the district, or 1 per student. I believe that it is 1 per student. Another anonymous question, remote conferencing as an option for students for funding purposes, and the FAQ covers a lot of this, but yes, you do have to have, the ARD committee has to determine that it's required for the provision of FAPE.
And Justin, just really quick, I did just drop into the chat a link to the remote conferencing FAQ for folks that were looking for that.
Fantastic, thank you. So Dr. Salinas asked, does the implementation of Amplio Dyslexia follow a daily intervention course, or does it follow the standard protocol approved and documented in the student service plan? So it is designed to be delivered. MTA, the curriculum MTA, is designed to be delivered in a very specific way. However, if you have students in special education who have an IEP that describes different needs that they have related to how that instruction is delivered, then it is customizable. The platform is customizable that way. Actually, the interventionists have quite a bit of leeway with that. But remember, the standard administration is sort of how it was designed and intended, but deviations from that obviously are possible based on individual student needs when we're talking about specially designed instruction. Does remote conferencing for special education require a medical reason like remote conferencing for general education? It does not. It requires the ARD committee to determine that remote conferencing is necessary for the provision of FAPE. I would think that one of the reasons they would do that would be related to a medical reason, but there's not the same requirement. The last question here, we're not able to offer an accessible remote conferencing program for students with disabilities without an ARD committee making that determination. That is correct. There are 20 days of remote conferencing available for any student as determined locally. But then if you're going to go beyond that, you have to apply for that waiver. In order to be granted that waiver, the ARD committee has to determine it necessary for the provision of FAPE. So Jacob, if you want to jump in while we have Monica here, and Jacob was going to highlight some of our most frequently asked questions around 4545.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And really quick, it looked like the link that I shared a minute ago for the remote conferencing FAQ did not actually go to all participants. So I just reposted it for everyone. So that link should now be in the chat for everyone. All right, so regarding HB 4545, just wanted to take a couple minutes this afternoon just to highlight a couple of questions that we continue to receive fairly regularly. Thought it might be helpful to bring those to this group just to share responses and clarify perhaps any misunderstandings that may still be floating around in the field. We often receive questions regarding the Accelerated Learning Committee and the ARD Committee's obligation to serve as an Accelerated Learning Committee. So what HB 4545 requires is for any student who is not successful in reading or math on the 3rd, 5th, or 8th grade administration of the STAR requires the local education agency to form an Accelerated Learning Committee. And the Accelerated Learning Committee would address the student's need for accelerated instruction in either of those areas or both of those areas. For students who are served by special education, HB 4545 requires that the student's ARD committee serve as the ALC, the Accelerated Learning Committee for that student, and serve the purpose of the ALC by addressing the student's need for accelerated instruction. We've received many questions clarifying the ALC requirement and asking about whether students should be placed in an ALC. So I just wanted to really clarify that the ALC is a committee, and for students served by special education, it is the student's ARD committee. And that committee is responsible for making decisions regarding the student's need for accelerated instruction, specifically in grades 3, 5, and 8, and for the areas of reading and math. We also get questions regarding the accelerated instruction requirement and what is needed for students served by special education. And that's outlined in the bill. HB 4545 provides 2 options for local education agencies to provide accelerated instruction for students. One is the assignment of the student to a designated master, exemplary, or national board certified teacher. And Monica, correct me if I'm wrong on that piece. And that's option 1. And then option 2 would be providing the student with 30 hours of supplemental instruction in the area of need.
Mr. Kleck, can I chime in here, Jacob?
Absolutely.
So yeah, you are correct. There are 2 ways a school district or an LEA can offer accelerated instruction. So option 1 is assigning that student or that student to a designated, certified, recognized exemplary or master teacher through national board or through the teacher incentive allotment. That is not to be confused with a master teacher certification, such as a master reading teacher or a master technology teacher. So these designations are different. And then option 2, as Jacob mentioned, is the 30 hours of accelerated instruction. And some of you may have already heard me say this, but in the state of Texas, there are only 4,900 teachers with that designation in approximately 100 school districts. So most school districts will revert to option 2.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying. We sort of addressed this earlier, but another question that we continue to receive is whether the ARD committee for the student creates the accelerated instruction plan. And so, as I'd mentioned, for students in grades 3, 5, and 8, who are not successful in either reading or math, then the ARD committee serves as the accelerated learning committee for that student. And House Bill 4545 does require that the ARD committee must meet for that purpose. So we do receive some questions often about whether the amendment process can be used by the ARD committee when they're serving as the ALC to create that accelerated instruction plan and share it with the student's family. And the House Bill 4545 does require that the ARD committee actually meet. It does need to be a properly constituted ARD with all the appropriate ARD committee members. And the ARD committee should consider the student's need for accelerated instruction, determine the best way to provide that for the student, outline what that's going to look like. And the student's family, parent or guardian should be an active member of that process. That's very critical that they are involved and that they understand what the accelerated instruction plan is for their student. We have been receiving recently some additional questions about how this applies for students in high school, particularly around students who are not successful on an EOC assessment, and how the ARD committee should consider that if the student is not successful or doesn't achieve a passing score, and the ARD committee determines that the student does not require a passing score for purposes of high school graduation. Would like to just call out that question has now been added to the House Bill 4545 FAQ. Can drop a link in the chat shortly directly to that document. But essentially, to address that question for this group, the ARD committee, of course, is able to determine whether a student is required to achieve satisfactory performance on an EOC for the purposes of receiving a high school diploma. That being said, if a student is not successful on the EOC in a particular course, and the ARD committee determines that that's not required for high school graduation, that doesn't waive the student's requirement under House Bill 4545 to receive accelerated instruction. So in that circumstance, the student would still require accelerated instruction. However, based on the ARD committee's determination that passing that EOC is not required for graduation, the student would complete their accelerated instruction plan, and they would not retake that EOC following the completion of that plan. Monica, did you have any additional questions on the FAQ that you'd like to highlight for this group?
Yes, mine are just overall general questions that I've been receiving over the last week. We've been receiving questions for the students that did not test in the spring, and that is an LEA decision to determine what TEKS aligned assessment they would like to provide students to determine if accelerated instruction is necessary. So that's one of the decisions that the LEAs can use. There is flexibility. We're just asking that it is TEKS aligned so you can make that determination if the student does need accelerated instruction because they did not take the spring assessment. The other question on the FAQ is question 54 regarding retroactive for summer programs and summer accelerated instruction that occurred. As long as the parent gives consent, and we're talking active consent, they understand that the summer program hours will be used as part of their accelerated instruction, then they just sign that consent form and you can use those hours, ensuring that the rest of the requirements, that the supplemental instruction was TEKS aligned, and you're able to use that consent to allow for those hours. So those are the two big questions that have been coming in the last week.
Perfect. A couple of other items that saw come in through the Q&A. Someone had asked about students who have Section 504 plans and how the requirements of House Bill 4545 apply. That question is addressed in the FAQ. Just dropped a link to that will take you directly to that FAQ in the chat, so folks can grab it from there. The question regarding whether a student with the Section 5 or how the local education agency should consider a student with a Section 504 plan for the purposes of the ALC is question 82 on the FAQ. And the fairly straightforward answer regarding Section 504 is that House Bill 4545 doesn't explicitly address 504 committees. That being the case, so districts should consider the accelerated learning needs of the student and convene the accelerated learning committees consistent with the general education requirement for any general education student. Another question that we have received related to special education and House Bill 4545 is regarding documentation and how the ARD committee should document the student's accelerated learning plan. The determination about documentation is really that's really the local education agency's decision regarding how they choose to document the accelerated learning plan for students. There are some resources available on the accelerated learning resources page on the TEA website that may be helpful for folks that are looking for some additional guidance or some examples of agendas or what documentation of accelerated learning plans might look like. I'll drop a link to that in the chat as well momentarily, but you can take a look at the section that's titled Planning Documents. And there's a couple of resources there. One is the ALC sample packet that's available in both English and Spanish. And then there's also some additional resources posted as well, some parent-teacher planning tools that are also available in English and Spanish that may be helpful for folks. But as ARD committees are serving as accelerated learning committees for students, they should be documenting the decisions that are made around accelerated instruction. They may choose to document those in the deliberations of the student's IEP. They may choose to document them using the ALC forms provided on the website or a local form and attach those with the student's IEP as well. I did just also want to highlight too, I know that many folks out there are looking for some further guidance on how House Bill 4545 applies for students who meet the participation requirements for the STAR Alternate 2. We certainly recognize that there's a sense of urgency in the field around guidance in this area. And we're working diligently internally to get some materials ready to share out with the field, and we hope to have those ready very soon and available and posted for folks to access that will help ARD committees and local education agencies make decisions about accelerated instruction for students who do meet the STAR Alternate 2 eligibility criteria.
So there were several questions in the Q&A section around, is school board approval required for the waivers, both the remote homebound and remote conferencing waiver that we've discussed. And I just got confirmation from our folks who work with the student attendance accounting handbook that yes, school board approval is needed for both of those waivers. Anything else in here, Jacob, that you think we have an answer for?
Here's a question, and Monica, you might be able to address this one. So the question was, if the student completed 27 hours of accelerated instruction over the summer, this past summer, would they then need to receive the additional 3 hours in the fall, or would it require another additional 30 hours?
No, you can count the 27 hours, so the student would only need 3 hours in the fall. And that's also in the FAQs too.
Perfect, thank you. There's another question in here, and I think I'm understanding this question correctly, which is asking essentially around the prior statutory requirements around intensive programs of instruction and accelerated instruction. And that is absolutely the case, that there were prior statutory requirements around accelerated instruction. House Bill 4545 did amend those requirements. However, the statutory requirement around intensive program of instruction was not amended by House Bill 4545. This is addressed also in the FAQ for folks that are interested in reading a little bit more about that. But the requirements for intensive programs of instruction continue to apply for all students, including for students who are served by special education, and the requirements of the ARD committee as they apply to intensive programs of instruction.
Scrolling through.
Justin, there's a question and that was asking how to find the new technical assistance items that you had shared earlier.
Yeah, it's listed on in the table, the same place where you click the link to get this webinar. The PDF is listed there, so it's in the table under recent and upcoming TEA webinars. So I think, I don't know, Jacob, if you're scrolling through the Q&A, if there's anything else that we want to answer that we're able to answer right now, please jump in and do that. I see.
I know there's a couple questions about Homebound as well, and similar to questions about students who meet the participation requirements for STAR Alternate 2. We're working to determine some guidance for the field regarding students who receive instruction through a homebound setting as well. So look for that to come.
Jacob, there's a question regarding EOC. So HB 4545 says that it's for any STAR assessment in which accelerated instruction is required. So for the end of course exams, that would be Algebra 1, English 1, English 2, Biology, and US History. And accelerated learning committees are just for the 3rd, 5th, and 8th grade STAR assessments in math and reading. And we do have a question on the FAQ, I believe it's question 47, that addresses homebound instruction. But as Jacob said, we're continuing to review that question and may provide updates again.
There is a question regarding properly constituted ARD. So just wanted to respond to that one, asking which teacher should be attending. So if a student is in grade 3, 5, or 8, and they were not successful on reading or math, or perhaps in some cases, maybe both, the ARD committee serves as the ALC for that student. And there's a question about, well, which teacher should attend that ARD committee meeting? So based on the way that the language in the bill reads, it states that the ARD committee must meet to serve as the ALC. So that means that all the participation requirements for a properly constituted ARD would apply. So there does have to be at least one general education teacher present to have a properly constituted ARD. If the student was not successful in reading, would strongly recommend that as a matter of best practice, the teacher who would be responsible for providing that instruction in the general education setting and can speak to the TEKS in that area should represent that area as part of the ARD committee. Similarly to math. If the student has needs in both areas, then certainly you could invite more than one teacher to attend that ARD committee meeting for the student. But as a matter of requirement, it just has to be a properly constituted ARD.
I am seeing a few folks asking about they're on the waivers webpage and they're not finding the waiver for the Homebound or for the remote conferencing. My understanding is that it's the general waiver. So it's just a sort of the generic waiver is what's submitted for that. There's not a specific one posted for it.
So with the board approval, is it per waiver or per student? Like per waiver type or per student?
So that's a really good question. Let me see if I can find the answer while we answer some other questions.
Good question that just came in, asking whether all of these meetings need to happen by the end of August. And I'm assuming that question's in reference to accelerated learning committees. So what we would recommend, certainly, begin convening your accelerated learning committees as early as possible. For ARD committees that are serving as accelerated learning committees for students, the same guidance would apply. There is, some flexibility for this year in terms of when that needs to happen, but the general rule of thumb is needs to occur within a reasonable amount of time of the start of school. Certainly, districts around the state, local education agencies around the state have different calendar years. So just kind of determining based on the start of school, have those ALC meetings, including the ARD committee meetings, as close to the start of school as possible. And especially in cases where perhaps the student requires accelerated instruction in more than one area, would be advisable to convene committees for those students as soon as possible toward the start of the school year to determine what the accelerated instruction plan looks like for that student. Monica, did you have anything to add to that?
No, you're absolutely right. We know that this bill was just passed in June, and so we are providing flexibility for school districts to convene the ALCs in a reasonable amount of time.
I'm just taking a look at what we have in Q&A.
We just received a question via chat. If a student classified as a senior for the school year of 2021 did not participate in the spring 2021 EOC assessments, are they still due 30 hours of accelerated instruction? And the answer to that would be yes, especially if they're still in need of passing an end of course exam for their graduation requirements.
There's a couple questions in the FAQ around when supplemental accelerated instruction can be provided to students. And there's local decision making involved around that. The House Bill 4545 does provide some guidance in this area that districts can provide it before or after school as well as during school hours. However, local education agencies do have flexibility in terms of what that scheduling looks like and how they will provide accelerated instruction for students either before, after, during school, or some combination of those options as well.
Yes, and HB 4545, the legislation also says that students cannot be removed from their foundation curriculum or their enrichment curriculum as well. So again, just reiterating what Jacob said, that would be before school, after school, embedded during the school day, potentially during an advisory or when time, but LEAs can determine how to embed those supports.
Monica, there's a question in the Q&A around how folks are notified when the FAQ is updated. Can you talk about that real quick?
Sure, the FAQ is updated every Thursday. So today at about 4 or 5 p.m. it will be updated. And if you go to the accelerated instruction, I'm looking at it here, the accelerated learning resource page, and I can drop that in the Q&A. I thought I put it in the chat. If you go there, you'll see where it'll say HB 4545 frequently asked questions, and it'll say updated. And then tomorrow we're hoping to have additional resources placed on that webpage as well.
Thank you. So we do have to wind up at 2:45 exactly because someone else uses this account and they need it at that time. So we're gonna grab the questions that we haven't quite got to here yet and use them to inform updates to the FAQ as we go forward. If there's things that we have not already addressed there, the answer to the question that Ed brought up for us about is the board waiver approval per student. That's kind of a complicated answer. That's why it took me a little bit for my friends to get back to me. It sort of depends. The board could possibly designate the approval authority for that to the superintendent. They have that ability to do that. If they choose not to do that, they are going to have to go in every time you have a batch of students that you are applying that waiver for, the board would have to approve it. So yes, the board has to approve it. It is intended to be a student by student, but some boards have designated or delegated that authority to approve those waivers to through board action to the superintendent. So I realize there's a few questions here we haven't gotten to, but we do have to jump off right now. Like I said, we will use this to inform our ongoing development of the FAQ. Thank you all so much for your attention today and for participating and the great questions. And we look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks.